All right, we are live.
Very good. Welcome back, man. Um, Again, I'm pleased to have you back. And It's good to be doing live streaming again. How's your trip, man? You don't need to deep dive into details if you don't wish to disclose that, but everything went well, I assume.
Yeah, I'm being a West Coast native. Being on the East Coast is, well, I guess Florida is kind of a weird example because it's sort of another California in a way as far as landscape. Yet, and also the population is very similar actually. So
Yeah,
maybe I'm not really experiencing the East Coast. Maybe you've probably had a other.
Florida's also. I mean, it's a pastiche, yeah, of the East Coast, of the Eastern Seaboard, of the South. And I mean, the Panhandle is like the proper South. You're in like redneck country, and then you go to Miami. It's like fucking Latin America, and then yeah, I mean it's a hodgepodge of a lot of very strange things, and got a fascinating history. Um, if you're ever inclined, I mean, I got something of a discrete interest in the Indian Wars, but the Black Seminoles. They weren't actually Seminoles at all. They were, a handful of Red Indians who had one time been Seminole braves. It was a bunch of like white outlaws gone feral, like black runaway slaves, and basically coalesced into a war band. And the U.S. Army had a hell of a time wiping these people out. It was like post-apocalyptic kind of shit. Like quite literally, it was like a bunch of people like gone feral. Um, and the uh, the way it was understood, the way the kind of press of the time understood it, and the kind of pop sociology that they understood it was that like, well, these are men who kind of like quit civilization and got taken on by the Seminole Nation. And initially, I think that was what they were, but then it basically these cats were like the dudes in the road who were like running around eating people, like no shit, like it's. So next time somebody tells you that like America lost its innocence, I fucking hate that phrase, man. But next time some shithead boomer tells you like America like lost its innocence when Kennedy got his fucking brains blown out, or when
That's the Oliver Stone version.
yeah, or like when some shithead tells you to like I don't know. They've all got every generation has some like arbitrary metric, but it's like I don't know, man. America was founded in racial warring, and it's really always been a remarkable place, but also a horrific place. And it was literally born in racial warring, and this endured until the 20th century. I mean, the point at which the Indian Wars are kind of like accepted to have ended pretty much by everybody, from like court historians to revisionists, is 1910. Kind of the last of the. I mean, unless you count like Pancho Villa's, raids into America and blackjack Pershing. I kind of count. I mean, that's for all. But even if you exclude that, I mean, the final, the final vestiges of like Apache resistance and things like that. I mean, weren't really finally totally quashed until around the 20th century. I mean, they didn't have nearly the force they did, in the century preceding. But the Red Indians, I mean, but it's not. This isn't ancient history. Like you watch cowboy movies, when they think Americans, they think 5 years is a long time in historical time or something. They don't realize 50 or 70 years is not really long. And other than westerns and the kind of cachet they did, really until like the 70s, is because there's people around. This was like basically in their living memory. I mean, it wasn't something that was remote. People act like it was the goddamn Middle Ages or something. But
Edward in the chat reminded me of
yeah,
something.
yeah,
Our episode last time was about California, and he said that he lived in Florida. And I think something we may not have included in our episode was the landscape of California is all over the place. So I don't know if people understand how different the Central Valley is compared to the cities. I imagine in the middle of the country, it's that same dynamic of, rural versus urban. And the Central Valley is what probably syncs up with what you were saying about how it's probably the most right leaning section of the state. And I wonder if that dynamic applies to Florida, because I don't live there, so.
Florida's peculiar. I mean, like the other day, like I was putting a lot of shade on Marco Rubio. I made the point. He reminds me of one of those like Menendez kids. Those are before your time. They were these they were these like rich kid Cubano guys, in Beverly Hills, and they blew away their parents. They literally just they scored a couple 12 gauges at Big Five. Is Big Five still in SoCal? Like back in the day, and like when I was going to LA a lot, like Big Five was like Sport Mart. It was like the big sporting goods store. And it may be different now, but up until like the mid '90s, you could buy any long guns you wanted there. They had deer rifles, they had shotguns. It's like his boys, they got a couple of pump action shotguns and just like put like they just like blew their parents away. I mean, that's not funny, but there's no way to really put shine on it. But in any event, Rubio is very much part of a type in Florida. I mean, Florida's is right wing in the sense that a bunch of Batistas who were loyal to and had the patronage of the Batista regime, fled there. You had a lot of southern new money that migrated there, around mid-century, both before and after the Second World War. I'd say that they're more properly right wing than East Coast Rockefeller type Republicans, what we used to call Rockefeller Republicans.
Yeah,
but I mean they're not really right wing. But it's a bunch of nouveau riche, like kind of southern folks, and a bunch of like rich Cubanos who hate Castro still, even though because they never moved on from like 1959. But it's and that's why. It's weird though, man, because like a lot of these politicos from Florida, there's been a bunch of people. I mean, going back, I mean, you don't remember this because it was 2000, but the Bush v. Gore fiasco. I mean, frankly, that warrants like an entire show unto itself. I don't want to bore people with the minutia of the kind of legal wrangling, but the way Bush v. Gore was resolved made zero sense. And like I made that point after the 2020 steal. A bunch of people wanted me to talk about what was underway, and I was curious as if like a Bush v. Gore thing type of remedy would if that would be the way Washington kind of handled it, because that's horrible precedent. But I mean, I don't want to deep dive into that now. But anyway, Catherine Harris, she was either the Florida AG or she was the I think she was the AG. I can't remember. She had some kind of high executive role. Okay, and she's like a good-looking broad for like an older lady. She's about the age I am now. And she was kind of being situated as sort of like the token female who's easy on the eyes, but in policy terms, is acceptable to kind of the party base. And then I mean, she didn't go anywhere. There's been a whole grip. I mean, not just her. There's been a whole grip of Florida Pauls who were supposed to be some kind of big deal, and then they they didn't go anywhere. I mean, some have been too ethnic. I maintain too that like that's why it was a joke when they were talking about Chris Christie, being kind of the next like Republican front man. I mean, all these people who seem too ethnic, whether they are or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, same thing with like Giuliani. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of these Florida types. But Harris herself, I mean, she was as white bread and crackerish as I am. But it's something. It's like, I think it's like Louisiana, there's just something unseemly about the political culture. I mean, same thing with Illinois, but I think I'd be very, very surprised if you ever saw a real presidential contender who came up through Florida. I mean, maybe that no longer holds, but I think it does. But yeah, Florida's a very strange place, man. A fascinating place, kind of a decadent place, but and there are weird parallels with Southern California, but at the same time, it's different, and because it is very southern in some places, and the Caribbean influence is quite a bit different than like the Mexican mestizo influence. I mean, it's just different. You know this. I mean, you live in fucking California, But the times I've only been there twice, and both times, I mean, I was glad I went there. I didn't have like a terrible time or something. I was glad I didn't live there, but it was always interesting. A lot of pretty girls. I mean, a lot of places are like that, but I mean, Florida really does have pretty girls. At least I thought so. I mean, maybe I'm just a horn dog with a wandering eye, but I don't think so.
Somebody, I think it's OAA said Florida's native conservatism seems to have been kicked out by Yankee Republicans and more right wing than Texas, at least. So
I don't doubt it.
I think that speaks to what you were saying about the Rockefeller Republicans. That
Yeah, and I don't doubt it. Well, I mean, it's also too. I mean, like we were talking about how the kind of fakery of the electoral map. I mean, Florida around the time California was arbitrarily declared to be a blue state. Florida was just arbitrarily declared to be the safe fucking red state. Yeah, I mean that doesn't surprise me. I mean, like I said, I believe a lot of this comes down to horse trading. It's like a kind of gerrymandering, but without actual stakes in play. I really, like I said, I've still got a huge amount of data that I was playing with when I was in the run up to the 2020 steal. I mean, when I was naive enough to think like an actual election, or at least the appearance of one, was going to be carried out. I started corralling all this stuff because I was interested in kind of exposing in an at a glance way what's wrong with the polling methodology and how it's really always been a lot of smoke and mirrors. I mean, going back to the Eisenhower era, quite literally. But point being, like, I still have like reams of data about this, and so I've got a head start if I wanted to deep dive into just the assignation of states as red or blue without regard to actual voting patterns and kind of quite literally the manufacture of outcomes in that way. Maybe that's something. I don't really think I'd want to devote print content to that. I mean, not because I think people might be interested in it, but I don't know, maybe like an ongoing like Substack thing. I'm not sure, but it's something. It's something. It's important to. It's an important topic to deep dive into. Niccolo Solo's brother. I don't want to out him because I don't know if he's comfortable with that. He probably wouldn't care, but in any event, he's very active on my platforms. And he's a great guy, but he's big into statistical methodology and its shortcomings, and a lot of what he does on the polemical side of things is pointing out what's wrong with the methodology of media and NGOs and how they corral data, and what's wrong with the inputs they utilize. And he's got a family and stuff, and unlike me, he like works for a living, like at a real job. I know he's done some work in that regard. I thought I played with the idea of kind of maybe trying to draft him into something like that, but it's an important subject, and that brings me to. I mean, I find it fascinating. I thought that Trump's CPAC announcement would. I mean, on the one hand, it didn't surprise me. That Mr. Trump dropped that. I thought it'd make a bigger. I thought it'd be more impactful in the news cycle, if for no other reason, because it's almost before the Ukraine conflict. It's like media was without Trump to burn an effigy every day. It was like they were wanting for content, and I thought Trump would feature more prominently in the news cycle, and maybe he will as months go on. I don't know, but I don't know if you've listened to the latest Mind Phaser that I dropped with Paul Fahrenheit and with our friend Joel Lauren. But Joel's a dope individual, and he's an incredibly smart guy. But he, for a dude who's not American, he's got a very nuanced understanding of American politics and political culture. I mean, like he pointed out, he's like, okay, the Republican mainstream, especially Pence, are going to do everything they can to rook Trump, but it's going to backfire. They're going to find some way to make peace with Trump, and whether they can or not, I mean, Trump's going to blast any in terms of the polls. I mean, Trump's going to blast anybody else the Republicans can field off the stage, proverbially and literally. Like, I don't know what the Republicans are gonna do. I mean, if they're I mean, a fucking ham sandwich could defeat Biden in a general, but in primary season, if the Republicans, it's going to look it's going to look very, very weak, man. If they don't find some way to come to terms with Trump, or at least his constituency. A Trump DeSantis ticket would be unstoppable, but I mean, I think DeSantis is even younger than I am. I don't think he's going to gamble on hitching his fortunes to Trump. I mean, that anything's possible, but I don't see that happening. But then again, I'm not a Washington watcher. Maybe people got a different take on that. But in any event, I remain somewhat surprised that it wasn't more impactful after he made that statement in terms of the focus of the media narrative. That was my only point. But
yeah, I just wanted to mention real quick. I thought I was going to be able to see that Trump speech at CPAC in person.
Yeah.
And I was actually asked to leave because I had a media pass, which I thought a media pass was supposed to give you more access.
Yeah.
But they made a distinction between a media pass and an attendance pass. And I was also told that, because me and my friend were sharing a seat because there wasn't much seats in our area.
Sure.
So we were like both sitting on one seat, and she said, that's cheating. So I was like, all right. It was one of these funny moments. I didn't get kicked out of the conference,
right?
Convention, rather. It was just I was in that room, and when Trump,
that's really kind of broke. I could see them vetting. I could see them vetting people and excluding certain NGOs and people from certain media outlets. And I mean, I totally understand that, because there's some people, I mean, they're only there to disrupt, and why should you avail them? Why should you avail them a spot, in lieu of somebody who's a good faith supporter? But it's categorically fucking with people on account of a press pass. I mean, that's not right. I mean, it's just bad. It's bad form if you're running a political campaign. I mean, I don't know. CPAC is weird though, man. Like, it's hard to get it's hard. I mean, the party, you can get a sense for what's being telegraphed by what goes down at CPAC, but it's not, there's not a whole hell of a lot to glean from it, because it's the partisan faithful of a certain stripe who bother to show up there. I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, the only Republican who's got real momentum is Trump. I mean, that DeSantis would be a very, very distant second. I don't know. I maintain that. I maintain that. Particularly this. The Pence and the people around Pence are going to exploit this Ukraine thing to the fullest, and Pence at base has a very neoconish streak, and the men behind him, that certainly is their orientation. They're going to present this as, Russia is presenting some grave challenge to global security, and because Biden's a pussy, he couldn't meet this challenge, and you're going to see Mike Pence like posturing like he's Ronnie Reagan and it's 1981. I mean, which is that's ominous as well as being incredibly stupid. But that's going to be the narrative, unfortunately. And with a certain people underestimate how broke the mainstream American right is. I'm talking about the voters and people who I thankfully I don't spend a whole lot of time around these people, but most of the people who trash me, I swear, are like deranged Republicans who love to run around calling people racist Nazis, and who want to like invade half the countries in the world, and who like love Israel and like think they're Jewish, even though they're really just like trashy fucking Methodists. Like, it's really crazy. Like, and those people haven't faded. I mean, they're like cockroaches. It's impossible to get rid of them. But just the fact that Mr. Trump, was a game changer that didn't make these people go away, or suddenly have some kind of road to Damascus conversion to reason overnight. I mean, there still is fucked up as they always were. So interesting to see. I don't know. I know a lot of people and like authentically right wing people like DeSantis. I mean, and that's fine. I don't particularly like him, but you know, but like I said, he's a young guy. I'd be very surprised. Stranger things that happen, but I'd be very surprised if DeSantis attached his fortune to Mr. Trump. I just would. I mean, that seems like a dude in his 40s. That would seem like too much of a gamble. I mean, that could that could make DeSantis in a big way. It could also ruin him, and then he's DeSantis can bide his time. In fact, he's at the age he's at. It's imperative he does bide his time if he covets the White House, and he's not just there to kind of be a fixer or a kingmaker of sorts. But yeah, it's interesting. What are people saying? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was a viral moment at CPAC.
What happened?
I never could have hypothetically imagined, I don't think, but there was this viral video that you may have seen. It was also on our side of Twitter of Larry Elder, who ran for office in California.
Right.
And because a friend of mine, he saw someone that he recognized, and he looked at his name tag and it said Samuel Taylor. And he's like, well, wait a second, but that guy looks like the American Renaissance guy. Why does it say Samuel? And so he was walking and talking, you can see it on video, with Larry Elder.
Wow.
And everyone is like, what is going on here at CPAC? And as people have been saying, the mainstream and the online right have been converging, and people are paying attention to it. So it's just, the people in the comments could probably provide more context.
That's very weird. I mean, that doesn't surprise me any, but I've
coalition building.
And it's also too, I mean, I'm telling you that people think Jared Taylor is this guy like on the fringes or something. I mean, he's really not. And other than I mean, he's got some America First sensibilities that I think are genuine and that I agree with. But I mean, other than that, he basically comes off like Charles Murray did in the mid-90s.
That's a good example, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's I realize that that perspective, really really upsets NPR types, and there's this kind of performative moral outrage that MSNBC will indulge in, about this kind of stuff. But I mean, that's basically a mainstream opinion. I mean, it was Jared Taylor, Charles Murray-like ideas that, I mean, what elevated Trump. I mean, it's, and
right.
So this idea that this kind of stuff is quote unquote discredited, to use the favorite kind of like nonsense term of the censorious left, that's really not true. Plus Taylor, American Renaissance essentially merged with the Council of Conservative Citizens, and the CCC, they don't have a tremendous amount of members. They're not some like mass membership NGO, but they've actually got a lot of clout, particularly in the South, but not only in the South. And I've gone to their events before. They got really mad at me like a really long time ago because Serge Trifkovich, he's this big Chetnik guy. I'd be curious as to what his takes are these days, considering that, considering how Chetniks are, as thick as thieves with Russia. But he published his book about like Muslims are horrible and they're gonna do all kinds of bad things to us and make women wear burqas. And he was talking about like how Israel is the best. And I'm like, that's fucking ridiculous. And I'm like, you're an immigrant anyway. I don't need Chetniks telling me that I should love Zionism. I'm like, if I had my way, I'd deport you too, along with all the Mexicans. And people are like, that's, how dare you say that's Mr. Trifkovich? I'm like, why? Fuck this motherfucker. I mean, I was more finessed about it than that, but I found it like really irritating, and he was really obtuse. The guy's a goddamn Chetnik, man. I mean, it's like, the fuck out of here. But forgive the rant, but point being, American Renaissance and the Council of Conservative Citizens essentially became one organization. I mean, not for tax purposes, but I mean, for all practical purposes. They hold events in common. And again, even Ameren has a lot of money behind it. they've got some pretty wealthy donors, and CCC again, they're not some mass membership organization, but they do have a lot of clout. And Jesse Helms, he spoke. I mean, this was back in the '80s, but he spoke at some of their events, and Trent Lott, when he was when he was Senate Majority Leader, that caused a big stir because he was tight with them. They are a real organization, man. They're not like a fiction. I mean, I got mixed feelings about them. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think. Okay, I mean, I think CCC, to Frank, does a lot of good stuff, even though I part ways with them on policy. But point being, Taylor is a reasonably heavy guy, in PAC circles, and it but I mean, I think Ameren has always had Ameren has always I mean, ever since they've been around, I mean, since 91, 92, they've always a lot of their ideas have filtered into the mainstream in peculiar ways. I mean, they're one of these organizations, kind of like Chronicles magazine, that's where Sam Francis used to be, and that's where Michelle Malkin started. It's like Chronicles magazine was kind of considered to be the outer fringe of what was, at all acceptable for the right wing. And they never had huge circulation, but stuff that featured in Chronicles, like policy ideas and things, this stuff would pop up, and you'd see like Newt Gingrich, like, having these takes, that you originally saw in Chronicles. And they'd be like, oh, wow, okay. And kind of like Conservative Citizen / Ameren is kind of like that. I mean, today is before, and especially the Trump constituency, because you've got more and more people who are comfortable, embracing that label. I mean, people are finally waking up to the fact. I mean, granted, it's like 40 years too late, but they're finally waking up to the fact that, like, look, no matter how conciliatory a posture you strike, if you're to the right of Bill Clinton, you're going to be called like some crazy racist or some horrible just type of person. So people are finally like, why should I why should I be conciliatory anymore? Because no matter what, I'm going to be called names. And I mean, that is positive. It's good to see people kind of snap out of that sleepwalking mode. But yeah, forgive me if that wasn't real coherent. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Jared Taylor's popping up. I mean, it's weird how he's going about it. But to your point, but that doesn't totally surprise me. But that's interesting. No, yeah, we'll have to deep dive more into CPAC and what you saw there. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, as you were saying with Charles Murray, Tucker talked about that, I think, in one of his most recent books about the whole. It may not have been Charles Murray specifically, but that Richard something, I forget his. Anyways, he was talking about, I think he cited Charles Murray as that was an example.
Bernstein was the guy we wrote the bell curve with.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that was kind of the beginning of the kind of like the Trump derangement syndrome. The being outraged in the media over academic stuff, and I'm not the biggest fan of her, but what Ann Coulter even cites, people like Peter Brimelow in the back of her book, and I know a lot of people are probably not privy to a lot of that stuff. I think Buchanan got in trouble for citing people, and it's just one of those things where it's like, I mean, it's history, it's investigating. You know what I mean? There's nothing.
Well, it's whatever source. Yeah, Buchanan cited American Dissident Voices in Death of the West. That was William Pierce's, National Alliance broadcast, and that was interesting. But I mean, it's I mean, sources stand or fall on their factual integrity, not on what anybody feels about the declarant. I mean, shit, man. There's times where I've cited Eric Hobsbawm, who's not enough Stalinist, okay, because not because I think he was a good man, or I like his I like the political values he held when he was alive. He was a terrible fucking person, but he was also one of the foremost Hegelian thinkers of his generational coterie. Because at least he was as rigorous as Ernst Nolte. I mean, his conclusions were broke as hell and in some ways preposterous. And his Stalin apologia was ridiculous. And I think part of that too was a way of. I think he was one of these cloistered academic types who really liked to antagonize people. But I mean, I've cited Hobsbawm in my long form stuff unironically because he made a good point, or because the data that he cited about the Soviet Union and during the what was the Weimar period in Germany. I mean, he corralled a tremendous amount of data. It's like, why wouldn't I cite him? But yeah, it's but in substantive terms too, no, Ann Coulter, like Pat Buchanan, like Michelle Malkin, like Sam Francis. I mean, they were clued into stuff that William Pierce was dropping in substantive terms. I mean, I know that the left and these fools and these Zionist attack dog types like at ADL, and they're kind of goyish accomplices. They're always saying like, oh, the racist right is they're engaging in some kind of dog whistle politics that sets the tenor of the mainstream right. That's not really true, but I mean there's always some kind of interdependence between ideas and thought. I mean, the left of all people should understand this. They're the ones who are always talking about, or at least they were when they had some intellectual rigor to them. We're always talking about, dialectical processes, and being the kind of prime move on to history. I mean, they of all people should not view this as some insidious thing, but they do.
Well, another example that I don't think we've even talked about, which is surprising, but Mel Bradford is one of the earliest and probably best examples of the gatekeeping on the right. And
Yeah.
that's just so unfortunate because anyone who's read his work, I mean, it is insightful stuff. And there is no, just like what was it, Joseph Sobran? Like it's very clearly in like asking questions in good faith and investigating things. So I mean, I brought that up because someone in the chat was asking about Huey Long and Governor Wallace. And it's like in the 80s with the William F. Buckley influence on the right and the Reagan administration specifically, which that's more relevant to today with the GOP trying to continue his model. The Mel Bradford treatment really needs to be reinvestigated. And so the Joseph Sobran thing too. I mean, those are just examples of like guys who would be Charles Murray, Sam Francis, but they got cut short by the machine. And so it's just one of those things that's what got me interested in politics, to tell you the truth. All these little rivalries between the magazines. I mean, you learn a lot about American politics,
Yeah, you do. Sobran was interesting too, and it's the tragedy of Sobran. I mean, Sobran wasn't young when he died, but I mean, he was only about 60, and his hell, he was really hounded. The IRS went after him. They went after his family. He was terrorized by these NGOs and these watchdog organizations. He really got done in, and he died. Not in abject poverty, but he didn't really have 2 cents to rub together. If Sobran had 20 years later, Sobran would have been okay, because he would have been in our circles. He would have been dropping content. He would have had literally 1 million subscribers, and he would have made just as good a living as he did when he was getting paid to drop content for National Review. I mean, that's kind of the tragedy of it. He was one of these guys who got canceled in the late 90s, early 2000s, when that could truly ruin you, and there was not an alternative structure in place where you could make a living by dropping content that was outside of the mainstream. But Buckley was a weird guy. Like Buckley did the same thing to Burnham, but Burnham had the connections, and Burnham was kind of a polymath. I'm not kind. He was a polymath. Frankly, he had more range than Sobran. Sobran was a Shakespeare scholar, and a big Catholic social credit type. And he was basically like a philosophy and literature guy. He wasn't some polymath whiz kid like Burnham was. I mean, so Burnham, you really couldn't cancel Burnham because like, the guy was just too much in demand. So when Burnham became persona non grata with National Review, he was kind of like, whatever. I don't need you people, and he made the point that he was, he kind of lost a lot of respect for Buckley and National Review long before his tenure there ended. But that was really all Sobran had, and Buckley was more. I think Buckley was a jerk, and I think he was a real phony. But at the same time, he was personally loyal, and I think he hung on to Sobran as long as he could. I mean, he didn't can him until I think 2001, which is kind of remarkable. And that always you can't explain it any other way than Buckley was loyal to this guy in some basic sense. And I mean that doesn't totally mitigate, but Buckley's not. I mean, Buckley's more complex than he's credited. I say that that's not me putting any kind of shine on Buckley, but yeah, that Francis was a guy who had a lot of demons, and he always had problems with his weight and things, and he was obviously kind of a haunted guy, but Francis got pretty effectively canceled. He'd been a protege of Burnham, and I can't remember who it was. It was some big shot senator, I think from South Carolina. Francis got his start during the late Cold War as an aide to this guy. I can't remember his name because I'm tired. But point being, Francis was being slated for a real stellar kind of beltway career back when such things were serious. When the Cold War was raging hot. And he became a media guy when he kind of got unceremoniously banished from those circles, and then lo and behold, he got shit canned from the Washington Times, and then the only place he'd pop up was Chronicles. I think Francis had some blind spots, particularly about the Second World War and revisionism. It was just something he didn't take up, and I realized he was a media guy, and so in conceptual terms, he kind of had to play ball within the paradigm. But I don't like it when people do that who know better, and he was a guy who knew better. I mean, he was literally a protege of James Burnham. I wish he'd written less polemic and less op-eds and more, serious books on policy and on theory and things. But that's just me. But San Francisco was dope, and I was flipping through. Not flipping through. I downloaded the ebook. I had a hard copy one time. It's long gone. I probably gave it to somebody and don't remember. But Shots Fired, Collected Works of Sam Francis. I found that on Z Library, and that's very interesting. And that's mostly his writings on race and things and immigration. He's got some other stuff that he wrote about the Cold War and communism, which I think is very compelling too, including right around the time 1983 when the Soviet Union shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, and Larry McDonald, the congressman who'd been a big John Bircher, he got killed. And Francis wrote something of a eulogy to him because I guess they'd been friends, which makes sense. And that was really egregious what the Soviets did. And that was on the heels of Able Archer and everything else. That was so yeah. Francis is not just a guy who wrote about race and things, but as a Cold Warrior is interesting. I guess that was my point.
Yeah, and as you said earlier about Sobran, that's not fair when people talk about things before they're popular, and now because of the Trump revolution, now the Overton window has shifted, and so now you can talk about immigration in that way, whereas before the GOP, to bring up Rubio again, I mean, everyone was Marco Rubio in the GOP before Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was the consensus. You couldn't even talk about anything outside of amnesty. That was just a given. And so the fact that you have immigration restrictionists like Ann Coulter before that. And, the Overton window, nobody can really influence besides the commentators and, whoever decides things like that. It's just, I mean, like you said, everyone should be allowed to make a living talking about this stuff, writing. And if you're too early or too late, I mean, that shouldn't have an influence, because it's policy, it's politics. And
No, indeed. At the same time, though, the lovely Mrs. K, who was talking to me for her podcast today, she was asking me if I was surprised at the the veritable mainstreaming of generally right wing ideas, and I told her no. I'm like the form it took with Donald Trump kind of being the man that people pin their hopes on and sort of rally around as a psychological symbol. His candidacy, I mean, and his presidency. I was kind of surprised by that, but I knew even when I was on Usenet, 25 years ago, talking to 8 other dudes about revisionist topics, I knew like at some point, this structure and these kinds of restrictions on discourse aren't going to be viable anymore, because nobody's going to believe in this anymore. And I could already see the cracks emerging. I didn't know if it was going to be in 10 years or in 30 years, but I knew at some point in my lifetime, like, this would happen. And I held on for long enough to where I actually found an audience. I mean, I would have been doing this anyway, even if at 45, almost 46 years old, I still only had an audience of 8 guys. I'd be doing the same thing. I mean, maybe that sounds pathetic to some people, but I'm actually interested in the truth, not just, popular takes. But I think the American system for practical purposes has been failing since 1973. Okay, I did not see, and with the fracturing of the moral consensus, which was very much emergent during the Clinton years, and without the Cold War, for people to kind of orient themselves as some kind of unifying catalyst, it was constantly begging the question in my mind, like, how long can this really endure? It can't. That's what brought me to these topics in the first place. And it's not. I think I might have a better insight than some men into political occurrences, but it's not like I'm some rare intellect, and it's not like I'm some augur. It's like if I see these things, there's got to be literally millions of other people who do too. So yeah, I mean, my take on that is exactly what I told her. One of the things that got me some pretty lean times was not just that, okay, I know that I'm right, but also like I'm not going to end up living in a cardboard box, because it's at some point what I do is going to find its audience, hopefully before I'm old and gray. But I don't know, but no, the way Sobran was treated was terrible. But that's the pro. I mean, you've got, if you're gonna abandon politics, I don't mean political theory and political work and partisan activity. I mean, if you're not going to play politics in order to get ahead, and adopt the whatever kind of skin you need to in order to remain employable or in the good graces of powerful people, if you've got to be prepared to be poor, or to deal with some things that some people would find a bit too stressful to constitute a pleasant life. But I was always okay with that. Not because I'm such a hard guy or something. It's just like, well, I mean, if you're right, and you're convinced of your own belief structure, you kind of have to live that and see it through. Otherwise, you're not really serious. But yeah, I don't know. So I guess the lesson taken from guys like Sobran is that if you're gonna hitch your fortunes to a man like Buckley, well, I mean, that comes at a certain price. And if you're not willing to pay that price, you're going to find yourself in precarious circumstances. You know, I don't know.
Well, and don't expect consistency from the Buckley types because
No,
Buckley's he's not even loyal to his standard, because that infamous debate he did with, what was it, Baldwin, that activist from back in the 60s. I forget his first name. Anyways, they're arguing about I think it was specifically, the topic might have been Brown versus Board of Education. And of course, Buckley was more of a Mel Bradford, like Wallace conservative at that time.
yeah.
And once that became unpopular because of the civil rights influence, he switched over to be a more moderate kind of.
180.
And so, but there's no accountability for his switch. And of course, he's going to throw everyone else under the bus who had his views, back when he did. But again, because he's the gatekeeper, he doesn't have to be consistent. He is the one that decides who is inside and outside the gate.
No, exactly. One of the first staff, part of that, for the initial coterie of writers for National Review, Wilmore Kendall. He was a big eugenicist and a big like racialist type. Like he really was. He was pretty hard line. And he was in the same vein as a guy like Revel Oliver. He wasn't the conspiracy theorist that Oliver was, but I mean, the guy was an out and out racialist. And he wrote the first issues of National Review. They had a lot of eugenics oriented material. Like, okay, even if integration was a lofty goal, there's just basic biological differences in the races and things like this. And yeah, your point, Buckley was a-okay with that. And then suddenly after Brown v. Board, which was really, Brown v. Board was not a legal decision. It was a sociology of Gunnar Myrdal somehow enshrined as a law, which is bizarre. But yeah, Buckley did a 180 on race, and that's why. I mean, that was apparent with the Wallace debate on firing line. I mean, it's like, look, you don't need to like Wallace or whatever, and Buckley, the rich Northeastern Catholic who thinks he's a WASP, and Wallace would have been at loggerheads anyway. But there's a basic dishonesty about the way Buckley was treating him, and I mean, Wallace was a lot of things. But the guy was not disingenuous or dishonest, and there was a basic transparency to Wallace, to which he really kind of owed his success. I don't know. Yeah, I've never thought Buckley was an appealing guy. I mean, even aside from philosophical differences, National Review, the tail end of the hegemony of print media was like when I was in college, like early mid 90s. And the American Spectator was eclipsing National Review. I mean, nobody remembers the Spectator anymore, but Emmett Terrell was he was kind of doing God's work with going after the Clintons, but he also became kind of singularly fixated on that. So the Spectator was basically just every like month after month, it was just kind of a hit piece on the Clintons. I mean, and okay, that's well placed. I'm not going to say people shouldn't have been doing that, but there wasn't a lot of substance to it beyond that. But even though it was eclipsing the National Review with guys my age, who were in their 20s and the 90s, National Review still had a lot of cachet even after the Cold War. I remember I used to read Nat Review in the Loyola Library, and that really was the go-to source. I mean, it became a joke, in the aftermath of the Iraq War and things. And then, I mean, now it was hilarious when National Review Online removed the comments section because the writers were just getting savage. It was, and they didn't know how to handle it. Precious as I guess they are, but point being, it hard as it may be to believe, 25 years ago, even National Review still had clout. It really did.
Yeah, now it's a lot like the Weekly Standard. I mean, who's even keeping up with Bill Kristol anymore?
Yeah.
To speak on you know, that whole comment fiasco. That reminds me of Academic Agent was in here. I don't know if he still is, but he gave a shout out to Leviathan and its enemies, which I saw one of his posts. I think it's a community post on YouTube where he gave a compilation, and it was Burnham, it was the Sam Francis stuff to kind of talk about the managerial state, which is brilliant. That kind of goes back to our T. Wright Mills.
Yeah, Academic Agent's great, man. I'm stoked that he was ducking in here.
And he reminded me of the James Lindsay stream, which I think is now behind a paywall, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is.
But that James Lindsay episode, that really gets at the heart of what you were saying about the boomer journalists are not privy to the online right. They're just not ready for not just the ideas, but the activism, the consistent online presence. And you know, there was someone recently who was talking about populism, and you can just tell on the timeline. I don't know if you see this frequently, but you know when like someone like a public figure makes a mistake on the timeline, and when they start getting the notifications, they're getting ratioed.
Yeah.
The impulse is to correct the record and, you know, put out another tweet just to verify, and you never do that. You never do that because you're only digging the hole deeper. And I think a lot of these journalists, I don't know how much time has to pass. I mean, we've seen the internet in a lot of different phases. And I mean, you don't have to be on like weird websites to understand, you know, be careful when you're on the timeline because they're out there. You know, the people
it's men who became comfortable in echo chambers. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm always comparing. You know, like I was telling Mrs. K today too. The reason I'm always comparing America at present to the late Soviet Union, it's not because I see some punctuated event, like November 9th, 1989, somehow fracturing America into, you know, dozens of discrete pieces. It's because there's certain characteristics in common to failing systems, and yeah, these boomer journalists, they're not as disengaged in the way that, you know, overprivileged people are. They spent literally the last half century in an echo chamber, and they've never subjected their own thoughts to any kind of self-worth scrutiny. But they've never actually had to defend these positions. You know, they were the equivalent of some Pravda journalist in the 80s. You know, who write and his content is like Mad Libs. You know, it's just like, okay, reference to the proletariat here and the capitalist exploiter there, and you know, make up some, you know, anecdote about heroic worker, and you know, bam, you know, this is how we write. I mean, it's quite literally that paint by numbers, and that's stupid, and then, like that fake. I used to back before social media was really a thing, like in the early 2000s. I'd troll journalists just by dropping emails on them and be like, yeah, you know, like I read your op-ed on immigration, and you know, these people you profiled, I'm like, that didn't actually happen. You like made this up and stuff like that. And like I never get any response, but it's like it became towards I mean, speaking of the kind of lines of drift between epochs, as we were particularly in terms of information and how it's consumed and produced or spun. You can't produce information, only spin it. Towards the end of old media's hegemony, it had just become so incredibly lazy. You know, these at one time, even Jagoffs like Peter Arnett, like broke as their takes were, when he dropped a take on like Nicaragua, he actually would have been on the ground in Nicaragua. You know, like at some point by like, you know, the turn of the millennium, you just have these young guys, these young girls at AP, you know, they'd be getting BlackBerry messages, you know, while they were sitting around in Washington, you know, from the AP office in Europe about what was happening in Germany or what was happening in Iraq. And they'd just be like, okay. You know, and then they'd like write out some fucking, you know, content based on that. But it was, they were never actually leaving their two flat in Pentagon City or whatever. And, you know, it became increasingly clear too, the emergence of what I think of like anecdote journalism. You know, like immigration restriction is bad because this is Juan. He's a hardworking man, and I'm going to write about him. But it's like obviously like this anecdote was just made up. You know, it's like it's insulting everyone's intelligence. You're trying to pass it off as real. I mean, I'm not saying when I was a kid, you know, like 30 35 years ago media was any great shakes, but it was less like obviously fake and stupid than it was like around 2000, 2005. I mean, it would have died anyway, owing to, you know, the emergence of social media and the way people engage with information and things. But it died earlier than it would have if there was actually some kind of integrity to it, in terms of the way it conveys information. And I mean, if it actually was based, if it actually was, you know, if it was actually based on real data. But I mean, it's not. That's the point we got to, and that's very Soviet-like too. You know, we're not just talking about values coloring the way information is presented. We're talking about, you know, just nonsense. We're talking about literal stories, you know, anecdotes that are confabulated out of nothing because they fit a narrative that is ideologically sound in the minds of powerful people. I think that's the big change in my lifetime. And that's what I'm getting at when I drop the analogy of. That's what I'm getting at in part when I drop the analogy of, you know, the Soviet-like character of the USA. What else are people saying in the chat?
Yeah, people are. There's quite a bit. One person was saying, Edward again was saying, yeah, a lot of people just judge others' opinions / ideas without holding any themselves. That's true. I wanted to speak on how people just don't prepare for critiques to the right of them when they're on the right. They're very, you know, there was a book written by somebody about conservative ink, and he was talking about how, you know, people are just ready for the left-wing critique. And to bring back academic agents and his, what is it, the Doom Patrol, the lineup he had for talking about James Lindsay. It's like, I forget which person said it, but one person mentioned how it's like, you know, we're right here online, you can see us, we're visible, and everyone thinks that they can just kind of work around, and, you know, they don't have to address us. I mean, not me, but like the whole like online right sphere doesn't have to have the same legitimacy as National Review did back in the day, as Chronicle magazines did in the 70s. It's like you said, the format is you have your anecdotal, you have the, you know, the Cato Institute way of putting out an article. It's
Yeah, exactly.
anecdotal, fake data, conclusion by an expert with a PhD. And it's like, once you realize, you know, us being in the decentralized internet, and it's not the, you know, 80s MTV world where the media can easily gatekeep. It's like we can use some of these sources, you know, like in this book, we can use all the things on the table. It doesn't have to be exclusive to the academics, the Buckleyites. I mean, they're not the only game in town. And I think people like you, people, academic agent sphere, I mean, it's going to be too big to ignore. You know, they're a force to be reckoned with.
Well,
And
yeah, that's very true, and that's something like I run across too, man. I mean, not I it's particularly with conservative ink guys, but also even with some of the Trump people on Gab who should know better, but apparently they don't. They'll like attack me like because like I'll point out that, you know, something they're saying about you know, generally it comes up in the issues of Zionism and revisionism and things, but other stuff too. I'll just be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, like they'll say something like totally idiotic or broke, and then they'll act affronted, like they'll act like I like expose myself in church because it's like, you know, how dare you attack somebody on the quote right? It's like, look, you know, it's like that's kind of an arbitrary metric, like what is right, what is left, particularly in America. But secondly, you know, it's like I'm not gonna buddy up to people who are, you know, who are goyish Zionists or something just because it's like, oh, I better not, like, you know, I better not make waves because like we both like believe in immigration restriction or something. Like that's not the point. You know, and you know, like I said, I mean, I'm interested in what's true. Maybe the things I play with are a little more abstract. I mean, I try to keep things concrete. That's why I actually write a lot about day-to-day stuff because I mean, people respond to that and that's dope. And I want people to enjoy reading stuff that I write, but also if I didn't make it a point to write about concrete stuff, even prosaic stuff, I think I might get lost in like theoretical world. And particularly because I'm not married or anything, and I'm kind of old, I could easily get very fucking weird. I mean, even more so than I am. But I don't write about this stuff because like I covet some career as like a Republican, like a local Republican alderman or something, or because I want the Republican Party to incorporate my ideas on revisionism. I'm interested in what's actually true, and I'm interested in the posterity of my own people and things like that. And it doesn't mean shit to me, joining some big tent coalition of the right, whatever that is. It's not just myself who runs up against such things. Like a lot of people do, and it's like you don't owe Donald Trump something, or you don't owe like Republicans something, or you don't owe like guys who claim they're on the right something. Your loyalty is to your own people, and to people who share your confessional heritage, and people who share your values. I mean, this is obvious, okay? You don't have some moral obligation to political parties. I mean, or to not like screw up some sort of electoral political enterprise because this doesn't make any sense. I mean, even if it did anyway, it's like, well, this is what I do, and if you don't like it, you don't have to read it or consume it. But I'm not running for office or writing copy for Mr. Trump at CPAC or anything else. So it's like I can say whatever the fuck I want, And that's what's broke about it. I mean, we're talking about kind of the dark days. I mean, they truly were. I'm not just driving a metaphor of when you had these fucking gatekeepers like Buckley and things. It's like, well, a lot of people who claim to be the kind of state affairs the right. I mean, they're as censorship happy as these jagoffs like Buckley were.
So I don't know if I'm out of line for bringing this up, but a lot of people, some people in the chat are asking about Moldbug, and I know you. I don't
look. You want to know what the deal with him is? I'm not gonna say his name, but like a dude you guys all know and respect. Moldbug got in. This was like a year ago. Bread Mold got in touch with him and is like, "Yo, you asked Thomas if I can get in touch with him," and I'm like, "Yeah, anybody who wants to get in touch with me." And I'm like, "Tell him to do it the normal way like anybody else. He can email me. I'll give him my phone number. He can DM me." And then like I never heard anything from him. Then we're just fine. I didn't really have an opinion on the guy at that time. I never thought his content was that compelling. Some of it's not bad. It's not really. There's nothing really I gleaned from his takes that was really insightful or interesting, and he doesn't really deep dive into stuff in a way that I think is rigorous. Okay, so I was never really interested in him. I don't know why everybody's like hypes the fucking guy. He's just not very interesting. But he's also I stand by what I said on BAP. Not when I was on Babcast the other day talking about Ukraine, but the time before that. I stand by what I said. Like Bread Mold's he's a kosher conservative who drops. He's like the poor man's Tucker Carlson. Like everybody's like, oh, why don't you debate this guy? It's like, first of all, I've been like challenging that fool, or I was for like a year solid. I mean, to the point where like I was kind of like debasing myself and making fun of him and like calling him a faggot and stuff. I'm like, it still like didn't work. Like no matter what I do, he's afraid. I mean, and I understand that because he's a punk and he's a nerd, and I just make him look stupid and make him look like a faggot if we debated. And nobody wants to look like a fucking faggot, so I get it. But anyway, I don't know why people find him so interesting. It's like if I actually had a conversation with Bread Mold, I'd have a hard time staying awake. It'd be like, like a last call at the bar. I mean, I don't drink, but you go to bars and the last call, there's always some ugly girl there. And she's not as ugly, but she says stupid things. So you're like sitting there, like trying to stay awake. And you're like, well, I kind of want to get my dick wet, but this is like the last thing I want to do, and I can't even stay awake. And like, what the fuck am I doing here? That's the way I'd feel if I had to debate Bread Mold, So why would I want to do that? How would that like advance anything? And now the way people respond to me is they're like, well, you're just a jerk. and you're a creep and you just hate, people who you think are, in mainstream conservative circles. That's not at all true. Like, a guy who's a great friend of mine and I owe a lot to is Scott Greer. Like, Scott is dope and he's a great guy. And I'm always honored when he wants me to lay content with him, and I'm always happy to do it. And Scott certainly doesn't agree with a lot of things I say. Scott thinks a lot of things I say are far out and not seemly. I mean, he's too polite to say that, but I know that's what he thinks, and that's fine. I mean, we're friends. We disagree on things. But my point is that I'm not just like mean to Bread Mold because of his take on Israel or because, I'm a bully or something. Like, he's a very fake individual, and he's not very smart. And he's a very fucking basic little punk, and he's a nerd. I mean, that's why. So I don't know. Like, if he called me up tomorrow and said, like, fuck you, man. Like, I want to debate you on some live stream. I mean, yeah, I'd be able to do that. I'll debate anybody as long as they're not, as long as I wouldn't be completely debasing myself to do so because they're, just like a psycho or something. So, I mean, yeah, I do that, but I don't think it'd be particularly interesting. I mean, what am I going to say to this guy? He's gonna drop some fucking stupid Tucker point about how, like, Israel is awesome and black people are stupid and have low IQs. Okay, that's great, man. What am I gonna say to this guy?
I think I have a graphic up here that might sync up with what you're saying.
Okay.
This kind of went viral a little bit, and someone in the comments was
Alex Jones. I mean, I don't want to actually be a jerk and make fun of people's appearances, and I mean, it's not like I'm any great shakes myself, but Alex Jones looks freaking terrible, man, these days. Like, what's wrong with him?
So
he looks awful. Like, he looks unwell.
Yeah,
I mean, Bread Mold just looks disturbing, but I mean, like, Alex Jones looks terrible, man. Like, that poor guy. Like, yeah, man,
I wanted to give some credit to Cunley. I'm probably not pronouncing that properly, but this guy deserves like a primetime show on anything. This guy is a content machine, and I can't underestimate that enough. So
no, I don't disagree, man. I'm just I'm sorry to harp on this. No, I guess I hadn't seen poor Alex Jones for a minute. He looks really bad.
So I just thought, oh, hold on, let me fix. All right, yeah, I just had to.
That's pretty dope. Yeah,
I know that guy is kind of a regular cast member on our side of Twitter. So
yeah, no, indeed, it was timely.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I hadn't seen it, but
no.
Yeah, I haven't listened to Bread Mold appearance on Alex Jones.
Okay, I was watching that earlier. So.
Okay, I'll watch it tomorrow. I will. I'm not just saying that. Not because I think just, I mean, I'm out of curiosity, frankly. I don't want to read. Everybody knows my take on Jones. I don't want to reiterate that. But I will give it a listen, at least so I can speak about it intelligently when people ask me. And I know that I know that that's been on people's minds, but like I said, it's not just it's not vanity, and it's not me just stirring shit that I make fun of Bread Mold. Like I said, I don't even think I do the same things that he does. I don't have the same interests. I don't know why people think that this is like some dream match or something. It's like, why? It's like, why? What do I have to say to this guy? Like I said, and plus, even if I did, I was like trash talking him like every day for a year, and he didn't care. So it's like, well, I mean, talk to him. Like, why are you asking me? It's I don't know. I mean, honestly though, like, kidding aside and funny stuff aside, I mean, he's obviously like an incredibly image conscious dude, and this is like very much like a career for him. Like that's just what it is. I I he probably thinks he could very well be hurt by engaging with me on any level because I may make him look stupid, or if people are going to associate him with me in some punitive way, and he's got like very little to gain. You know, it's not like he's going to get paid to freaking talk to me or whatever. And I mean, I'm not just being mean. I think it's very clear that this is, like I said, this is a career for him. You know, so
Well,
he's worried about the bottom line, and yeah,
he's in the NRX world. So what do you mean he can't associate with you? Like you're going to talk if he's going to talk about optics at this stage of the game. It's like, well, what? You know, what is a reactionary? What is the Dark Enlightenment if not? You know, I mean, even Sargon was talking about it. It's like this isn't nothing.
I'm not saying it's rational, but I'm not saying, but I mean, I'm telling you that's like what he's thinking. I mean, I'm not just speculating. Like I said, I don't want to drop who was kind of working as his shuttle diplomat, as it were, but he was for some reason trying to make overtures to me like a year ago. I mean, I don't know what his angle. I mean, well, it's obvious. I mean, he wanted to put something together to stir controversy, but he, you know, I'm sure he talked to whoever he trusts, to kind of help plot his career trajectory, and he realized, well, you know, this is not going to help my bottom line, and it may very well hurt me. You know, and one of the reasons I disdain guys like him is because they're overly cautious and they want to strike partisan poses, but while scrupulously remaining within the parameters of respectability or whatever's arbitrarily assigned that. And like I said, that's why he avoids revisionist topics. You know, it's you want to go around talking about it like you don't like Joe Biden and you think blacks are stupid, and you know that's not really controversial. Like a lot of people think that. It might not be a polite thing to talk about it, you know, in public, but this isn't some crazy, like, you know, shocking, shattering fucking thing. This is, you know, like I said, Charles Murray. I mean, Murray's got more depth than that. I'm not suggesting he's just some stupid, you know, kind of pundit. But I mean, these are his takes. He's not writing about revisionism and Nuremberg and things. You know, that's viewed as beyond the pale, or it's just something that makes people uncomfortable. And it's like, well, okay, you know, even if you can have some kind of, you know, career-oriented brand, if you address those kinds of things, there is something unseemly about it. You know, for people like Bread Mold, that's what I mean. And again, I'm not saying that's totally rational. It's not. But well, what are careerists if not overly cautious? I mean, isn't that kind of isn't that kind of why people disdain careerists aside from the fact that it's viewed as kind of disingenuous and unmanly? I mean, yes, that's why. It's a rhetorical question. But okay, what else are people saying?
The chat is just very distracting right now. No, we got all the cool people in chat right now.
No, that's great. I'm very, very pleased people are willing to show up and participate. I mean, that's the whole point, you know.
Yeah, no, the Moldbug thing is very interesting just because it's I guess that's, I mean, when you have philosophy and politics on the internet, that is pretty much what you would expect is
Oh yeah. No, and like I said, I don't find Moldbug particularly interesting or smart, but if he called me up or emailed me tomorrow and said like, "Hey, I want to do a live stream with you," or I want to discuss or debate X, I mean, I'd do it. I'll talk to anybody unless they're obviously truly disreputable. I mean, not in the way bougies say disreputable. I mean, just like genuinely, like unless there's some kind of scumbag or unless they're obviously you know, somebody who's not only disingenuous but trying to harm us in some way. You know, I'll go on anybody's podcast or I'll go head to head with anybody. I mean, I've made that point before. I don't even need a full day. It's gonna be 12 hours notice generally, and it's okay. And but yeah, that's not him. So, you know, I'm not. I'm the easiest person in the world to locate. He could reach out anytime he wanted. He doesn't want to. So if he wanted to talk to Fred Mold, they should talk to him.
Someone, Mosby Erickson said, Bread Mold gets to go on Tucker and AJ so that they don't have to invite a guy like Thomas on.
That is true too.
Do you think it's that calculated?
Yes, I do.
I mean, I believe that, but I mean, I think I was talking to Oros and he mentioned that at one point. It's like, okay, once he's on Tucker's, that show with the wood paneling, which is whatever, but it's like, man,
well, yeah,
so that's it, isn't it?
I mean, his angle was, well, that's what I mean about his brand being a career trajectory. That this was very calculated. You don't end up, you don't find yourself in that role by accident. You don't. Whether you're Bread Mold or anybody else, that this happens on grounds of very deliberate calculation and very specific steps to realize that ambition. And so, I mean, it's always been clear to me. I've only been aware of Bread Mold for a couple of years, but since I was aware of him before his profile was as high as it is today, this was very clear to me that that's what he was doing. Like I said, I'm not just trying to be mean or be funny. I never understood why people found the guy so compelling. I mean, his takes are basically lifted from other dudes like Charles Murray, who frankly are a lot more interesting and have a lot more depth. It's like, what do people get out of Bread Mold that is like so dope and fascinating? Like, I don't understand. And it's not like he's a funny guy or like a really charismatic guy. He's just kind of like a nerdy guy dropping takes that other men have made, the case for better with more depth. But it's not for me to say what people should or shouldn't like or fucking consume. I don't know. People like Bread Mold, that's fine. They're welcome to like him. But again, and not to belabor it, like when people ask me why, like I've never met the dude, well, ask him. I as anyone will tell you, including yourself, you met me because you sent me a DM and said like, hey man, can we talk about stuff? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we became friends. I mean, I'm not exactly hard to fucking get an audience with, I mean, I'm very, very I'm very available to people.
Well, I think Ethan Ralph would be more than happy to host that. So that's something that you could probably. I know you've been on there before, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, like I said, man. If somebody wanted to host me on the same panel as Bread Mold, either just incidentally because they wanted us both on the same panel, or if they were trying to orchestrate some kind of a give and take of an adversarial nature. I mean, I'd be able to do either one. I don't care. I mean, but like I said, it's never come up because of him. Anytime you wanted to do that, I'm happy to do it.
There you go. What else we got? Yeah, Charlemagne was saying that you have to hit him up, not the other way around. So,
well, I'm not going to do that because I've got no real interest in the guy. And like I said, he wouldn't even be on my radar, but he was making overtures to me with third parties. Like,
yeah,
this, I mean, that in of itself, like, kind of put me off. It's like, who does that? Be a grown ass man. This isn't junior high school or something. But what do I have to say to this guy? Again, like, I'll reiterate. That's what I've been saying to people ever since they started raising his name, and it's like, what am I going to say to this dude? there's nothing about him or his takes that's really interesting to me or really bears on what I do. I mean, I don't know how to make it any clearer.
Edward is asking about, you were on with Ethan Ralph. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that was one of the ways you kind of got on my radar, Thomas.
Okay.
So that was helpful. Yeah. Sorry, this whole the whole Moldbug thing really got everyone going. There were questions. Someone was asking, what do you think about Louisiana, I think?
What about it? Like, what specifically?
It was a very broad. I think just like, have you ever been there?
No, I've not. I mean, I know something about Huey Long, like we talked about, and I know something about Louisiana as regards the war between the states and the Confederacy, but I've never visited there. I mean, it's a fascinating state. I mean, we were talking about one of the pods I did lately. We were talking about war between the states. I mean, the point that a lot of the white refugees they ended up in the east from Haiti. When the slave revolt happened there, and there was the ethnic cleansing of francophone whites. There was a tremendous amount of refugees who ended up in Louisiana for obvious reasons, linguistic familiarity and a culture that was friendlier to them than the Eastern Seaboard was. But the progressive types then as now had a fetish for refugees, and in those days they didn't hate their own race, so white refugees were acceptable too. But Louisiana is culturally important. I mean, people tend to look at it as some kind of outlier or like oddity. That's kind of condescending, but also it's not really true. They're an essential part of the continental heritage of the United States, the non-Anglo-Saxon heritage.
We got one from academic agent Thomas. Is there any parallel in American history to the way leaders are acting now? Examples are Lindsey Graham calling for Putin to be assassinated. Seems insane to him.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, Lindsey Graham's a particularly despicable creature. He's a goyish Slav Zionist with a woman's name. So I'd suggest he's confused in all manner of ways. The only parallel, and it's an imperfect parallel, is the years after the War of 1812 and the Creek War, until the war between the states, when you had these firebrand abolitionists who were quite literally damning the South to hell and suggesting that it was God's will that some kind of slave revolt, like happened in Haiti, would happen in the South. And you had men like Nat Turner, whose racial murder spree really hardened Southern opinion against any compromise in the issue of slavery. Nat Turner was inspired by the Liberator, this tabloid magazine that really was tailored for that very purpose, so like inflame the passions of politically minded blacks and to radicalize them. Like, this was really crazy. You had people in the you had these John Brown types. I mean, John Brown had a particular he was remarkable in his balls and his audaciousness, but his view that God was it was God's will that the South be annihilated for the sin of slavery. I mean, this was practically mainstream in certain progressive corridors, and calling for a race war against your own people to purify the land, that's completely insane. And I consider that to be the only parallel. Creatures like Lindsey Graham are far stranger. Like I said, Graham seems to try and be more Zionist than actual Jewish people. I think that's incredibly strange. Even for a career politician, you've got to have something really wrong with you to internalize those sorts of values. I think there's something abjectly moronic about the political culture today. I know there is. I mean, there's something fundamentally insane about saying you just want to go to war with Russia for no reason. But what do these people think assassinating Mr. Putin would accomplish? Like, what would that accomplish? Like, even if that wasn't an idiotic idea, I mean, what I don't understand what these people think that would get them. I'm always making the point that they're not going to like the man who replaces Mr. Putin, who frankly has been far too tolerant to the United States. But I don't know. But yeah, to bring it back, I'm sorry, I'm tired. I didn't mean to ramble. The only parallel to me is the antebellum years when you had people quite literally calling for the annihilation of the South by racial homicide, and that's incredibly deranged. But no, it's not the kind of infantile absurdity of discourse today. You're not going to find a perfect analogy.
Yeah, I know my generation was sympathetic to Lindsey Graham because of the Brett Kavanaugh trial.
Okay.
And it's like that is such a small victory in the grand scheme of things. I mean, you know, we've heard it all before, but yeah, like he's one of those people who people just don't investigate. People don't, you know, he's in the news, and it's like oh man, he's like Karl Rove or
Well, people also, I mean, like I said, I'm sure people think I'm fixated. I don't think I am, but it's people don't realize how incredibly weird it is for some southern for some southern white Protestant guy to like basically decide that he's Jewish. It's like if you're gonna be a bigot, at least be a bigot on behalf of your own people. Like how strange are you if you're I mean, think about that. You know, you're some southern white politico, and is basically his raison d'etre is to pretend he's some kind of like rabid Zionist. Like, why? That's a really, really weird affectation. In addition to the fact that it's a kind of treason to your own people. I mean, why would that even occur to anybody? Like, who acts like that? And you know, there's something really wrong with Americans that they tolerate a man like this. You know, with a kind of lifetime tenure in Washington. I mean, that cuts to what I'm always talking about too, about the electoral map being fixed and not being real contested elections in most states. Like, why? Like you telling me where the hell these guys like Lindsey Graham come from? And like, how's this guy like never ever challenged for a seat? Like, how's that possible? I mean, like think about that. You know, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. You know, but yeah, that's very, very, very grotesque person.
Cool Dude asks, what is your favorite Priest album?
This is I mean, Defenders of the Faith is my favorite. Defenders of the Faith and Killing Machine, also known as Hellbent for Leather, but I like Defenders of the Faith more than I like Screaming for Vengeance, and that people seem to think that that's a weird take, or that I'm trying to be different or something. I'm not. Defenders of the Faith is like Zenith of Priest, and the Sentinel is my favorite Judas Priest jam. And I don't know. I mean, the first yeah, it's a toss up between Defenders of the Faith is more technically tight, obviously, and Priest kind of seminal sound had fully developed by then, but Killing Machine is that's when Priest became Priest. That's when it became it went from being kind of a Sabbath like 70s band to being like, you know, 80s Priest, you know, and yeah. I've been listening to Killing Machine a lot. They had in British Steel. But yeah, I'd say Defenders of the Faith is my favorite.
Okay, I think for me it's between definitely Defenders or Painkiller. I know that's kind of a different style.
Painkiller is a perfect record, and like there's no filler on it, and it utterly slaps. It's punishingly, devastatingly heavy. I've got nothing bad to say about it. But personally, to me, peak Judas Priest is like I said is Defenders of the Faith. But I mean, I even like Turbo, man, and like people think Turbo is a weak album. I think Turbo is a great album. I think it freaking slaps. The weakest Priest out, the only Ram It Down, I think is a weak album, but even that's got some tracks that I think are dope. But yeah. But I realize, like I said, people, and like Scott Greer, like a lot of people, like he's a big music guy. And he, like, to him, like, Stained Class is like the Zenith of the Priest. And I remember him telling me, like, he knows I like Thin Lizzy and a lot of, like, you know, and Diamond Head and stuff. He's like, really? Like, I would have thought you would have liked 70s Priest. I'm like, man, like, when I got into Priest when I was a little kid, you know, it was like 80s Priest that grabbed me. And, like, that's, I mean, don't get me wrong, man. I like 70s Priest. You know, Stained Class is a dope record. I could listen to it all day, but it definitely doesn't grab me like stuff like Killing Machine does, you know?
Do you like the slower stuff, like Before the Dawn? Do you think that's a dud? I'm just curious.
No.
Yeah,
No, I mean, it's good. It's just it's different. It's like, yeah, it's just different, but different isn't bad.
right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Screaming for Vengeance, I always thought it was a little overhyped. Still good, still a good record. I just always thought songs like Fever and stuff like that. It's like, or Bloodstone. Bloodstone is
Yeah,
very up tempo, and it's very conflicting with the title track and Electric Eye.
yeah. It's not.
Like the
It's
tone's all off.
it's not a real cohesive album.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you can tell that some. I guarantee you, post. I don't know the history of it. I'm sure Scott could actually tell us we're here, but um, post production there was probably some meddling to, you know, so some stuff could he dropped as singles or whatever. I don't know, but that's one of the reasons I like Killing Machine though. I mean, it's not just because it's like punishing, but it's like very, very cohesive thematically and everything else. And I mean, Defenders of the Faith is super tight thematically. I mean, that's yeah. Look, I like everything by Priest. I even like Jugulator, which arguably isn't even a Priest album.
No,
But
that's awesome.
it's interesting. And Ripper Owens, like I tell people, I saw Ripper Owens when he was on the mic for Iced Earth.
Oh, really?
In 2004 because they were playing with Children of Bodom. I'm a huge Children of Bodom fan. I love Alexi Leo. And I saw Children of Bodom and Iced Earth with Ripper Owens on the mic play at the Metro in 2004. And it's really hard to get me to go to a live show. It really is. Like I was telling the people on my timeline, I'm trying to get some of the fellows and some of the girls to craft work, yeah, which I think will be dope. And a bunch of people are stoked to go. And so I'm like, okay, that's great, but that's not something I want to miss. But you know, it takes a lot to get me to go to a show. But when Bodom played the Metro, I'm like, I gotta go to that. And there was an added bonus that Iced Earth was there. I had no idea that Ripper Owens was even. I hadn't really kept up with him. My younger brother, who's dead now, he met Matt Barlow a couple times, and Barlow was kind of an interesting guy. I didn't know the dude, but my brother did. And but as far as I knew, like Matt Barlow was still like on the mic. And then like when I get to this show, like this dude's like, yeah, can you believe like Ripper's like with Iced Earth? I'm like, really? I'm like, oh, that's kind of dope. And yeah, he blew the roof off the place. Dude can sing. But so yeah, I think Jugulator is worthwhile, even though it's not really Priest. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, the Turbo Reckless. That song was going to be on Top Gun instead of Danger Zone.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
Now, do you remember a movie called Johnny Be Good with
yeah, with what's his name? With
Downey Jr.
And it's got the guy in the guy in the title role. He was one of those Brat Pack guys. He was in the Breakfast Club. He was in
Anthony
Michael Hall.
Yeah,
that's a really random, obscure movie. It's about it's like about some football quarterback. Yeah,
right. That was their attempt because they missed the Top Gun bandwagon. So like,
wow.
Let's put our title in a movie, and it goes to Johnny Be Good, which does nothing at the box office.
That's crazy. I had no idea about that. There's something else that's crazy about Top Gun on that soundtrack. There was the soundtrack is the jam Mighty Wings. It's this horrible like power ballad, but I can't remember who did it, but it's like you never would have guessed like what band dropped that. I think it was
we could
yeah, pull it up. Right? Yeah, I'm going to. I feel like I'm going freaking senile.
Yeah, no, that was peak 80s for sure. What was the song? Mighty Wings?
Yeah.
Well, that was Cheap Trick.
Cheap Trick did it. Yeah, which is bizarre because it's like that sounds nothing like anything Cheap Trick ever dropped before.
Yeah. No, that's a very
it's incredibly weird. I mean, maybe I'm making more of this than most people think it merits, but I thought it was incredibly weird. I found out it sounds like a Kenny Loggins track, and I remember for a while, when Cable was playing Top Gun all the time. I remember I caught in the credits one time, and they're like, yeah, you know, like Mighty Wings by Cheap Trick. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like fucking dudes who did Surrender. You know, like it sounds It sounds like Kenny Loggins, cutting something for a freaking Navy recruitment ad.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's
look, check
funny.
it out. We've been going for like
Oh,
94 minutes, and I don't mean to be a freaking fairy, but I'm getting tired, man. We can go live again tomorrow if people are down for that, but I got to get some sleep.
yeah, no problem, man, dude. This has been more than amazing. So
No, I'm really stoked, man, that people like doing the live streams. I mean, that's the whole point, with so that's dope. But yeah, I mean, it's up to you, man. I mean, if you're down, and if we can go live again tomorrow. I got some stuff to do during the day, but like tomorrow evening would be dope. Just something to think about. I mean, if not, we'll go live again in a week. But yeah, I appreciate it, man, especially on short notice. And I'm sorry we started later to everybody. That was my fault. So if you want to go aggro on somebody, blame me, not Ace. But yeah. Again, I don't mean to dip abruptly, man, but I gotta get. I'm my alibi is that I'm old. But but all seriousness, yeah, this was dope. And yeah, I'll hit you up like mid morning your time tomorrow, man, by text, and yeah, just think it over if you want to go live tomorrow again. But otherwise, and we'll talk anyway. I want to get your sit rep on Florida. But
awesome. Yeah. Well, here I'll get the stream. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.